Hello, everyone. I'm very honored to be here and to be the chair of session number 3, Aging in Society. My name is Nati Blum. I'm a psychology doctor and I'm the CEO of the Israeli Alzheimer Association. And I want to invite James Starr to talk about history of age and aging.
Thanks very much indeed, Nati. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me. It's a great pleasure to join you, and thanks very much indeed to the organizers for the invitation to speak to you today. My research explores the surprising, but also, I think, the highly instructive historical origins and subsequent development of modern medicine and science. In my work, I draw on letters to and from researchers, official documents, images and films, scientific and popular articles and books, newspapers and magazines, to understand the trajectory of scientific thought and practice. In this respect, the science of aging and efforts to overcome the process of aging in particular are especially fascinating. There have been countless historical examples of attempts to revitalize the human body, and almost every conceivable substance and technique has at some point been claimed to have the power to slow, stop, or even reverse the aging process. Scientists, clinicians, pharmacists, manufacturers, and advertisers have been variously involved in promoting these. Some base their claims on the latest science, whilst others appeal to long-standing mythologies, trends in self-help, or the power of nature. Although humans have tried to understand and mitigate aging for centuries, the period immediately after World War I saw new strategies for rejuvenating bodies and minds come to prominence. These included everything from surgical procedures, which aimed to manipulate sex hormones in the body, to everyday beauty products like skin foods and moisturizing creams. All seemed to promise wildly different results. In the case of hormone treatments, for example, a patient might expect to regain lost fertility, as well as recapture the vigor and energy of youth. The more mundane and domestic cosmetic products, marketed almost exclusively to women, claimed to bestow a youthful appearance and charm. These different claims were rooted strongly in gendered understandings of what kind of rejuvenation was appropriate for men and women. In men, renewed sexual function and economic productivity was the goal. For women, the restoration of youthful appearance promised a return to the time of a woman's life when she was deemed to be of most social, reproductive value.
James,
Interestingly,
we can't see your presentation.
You can't. Okay.
No, we see only the first slide.
Oh, that's okay. No, I haven't moved
You're
on to my
not
next one
moving
yet.
the slides. Okay.
No, not yet. Okay, thank you. Interestingly, life extension was rarely the ultimate goal. Instead, the maximization of the youthful, healthy period of life took precedence, an idea which, of course, underpins a large proportion of research in the present. Today, I want to explore just a few examples of rejuvenation ideas and practices, focusing on how early 20th century research in cellular biology and endocrinology underpinned a fundamental rethinking about aging and how bodies worked. In 1912, the French surgeon Alexis Carrel won the Nobel Prize for Physiology for his innovations in vascular suturing techniques. On the 17th of January that same year, Carrel began an experiment using a culture of cells taken from an embryonic chicken heart. Sealing them in a stoppered flask, he sustained the cultured cells for over 2 decades and claimed that such preparations could survive indefinitely if provided with the right environmental conditions. Carrel published his initial findings in May 1912 with a bold title, On the Permanent Life of Tissues Outside the Organism. This paper caused a sensation and provided tangible and tantalizing evidence that immortality might be a realistic ultimate goal. It created a fertile environment for claims of successful physiological rejuvenation and remained hugely influential until the work of Leonard Hayflick on cell division in the early 1960s. In 1912, just as Carrel was in the early stages of caring for his cluster of chicken cells, the Austrian physiologist Eugen Steiner devised a series of experiments to manipulate the levels of what he termed sex hormone, testosterone we would say now, in guinea pigs. Working at the Vienna Experimental Biological Institute, the vivarium, Steiner concluded that the secretions of the testes were responsible for governing sexuality and sexual activity and behavior. He then began overseeing partial vasectomies in humans in an effort to increase the production of testosterone. This, he theorized, would rejuvenate and reinvigorate his patients. Unsurprisingly, this attracted considerable interest from the international medical community. In 1923, for example, The Lancet published an article commenting on Steiner's work, which had, quote, an apparently irresistible appeal to elderly persons whose waning virility renders them disconsolate and fretful. However, the journal reserved judgment on the effectiveness of the procedure, noting that, quote, the method is evidently in such an early experimental stage that its unreserved advocacy is not at present warranted. Steiner was subject to fierce accusations of quackery and deception, but he also generated great public interest in his work and inspired a loyal group of supporters within the medical profession. He was himself nominated for the Nobel Prize by his peers on at least 9 separate occasions between 1921 and 1938, and the archives of the Nobel Prize Committee reveal that his work was consistently praised during deliberations. Public audiences, meanwhile, were fascinated by extensive press reports of successful rejuvenations using his procedure. Steiner published successful cases and testimonials from patients through a large volume of papers and books. He even collaborated with the celebrated German film production company UFA to produce the Steinert film. This was premiered in January of 1923 and documented the theory and practice of the Steinert operation. It toured around Germany for months afterwards and was ultimately shown in cinemas across the world. Steiner's research into the action of hormones proved to be important foundational work in the emerging field of endocrinology. His early theories about the relationship between hormones and the life course were critical in the early stage development of HRT in the 1940s, for example. In his own lifetime, the so-called Steinert operation was a fairly expensive treatment. High-profile endorsements from the likes of sexologist Norman Hare and surgeon Victor Blum bolstered Steinert's international reputation, and it became fashionable among the higher levels of society to be Steinert. The operation was performed by his disciples globally across Europe, the United States, Asia, and South America. At almost the same time as Steiner was active, the Russian-born surgeon Serge Voronov was pursuing an even more radical anti-aging procedure. Voronov had trained in Paris, and it was during a trip to Egypt early in his career that he first noticed in a group of eunuchs an apparent connection between the testes and male sexual characteristics and behavior. He was later enlisted by the French government to address a worrying and seemingly sudden decline in the fertility of sheep in both France and some of its North African colonies. In the course of investigating this, he tested several means of enhancing the potency of rams. Most successful, he claimed, was the grafting of fresh testicular tissue into the testes, which appeared to restore the fertility of the rams and provide them with a new lease of life. Like Steiner, Voronov soon explored the potential of his methods in humans. He introduced his ideas at the International Congress of Surgeons in London in 1923, as you'll see, to considerable acclaim. And by the mid-1920s, he and his entourage occupied an entire floor of a large luxury Parisian hotel. Here, he grafted material taken from monkey testicles into aging men, documenting the supposedly successful outcomes over the following months. Voronov reported that his patients experienced increased appetite, energy, sexual potency, hair growth, and concentration, a literal restoration of their youth. His method was, as you might imagine, a public sensation, but also hugely controversial. The medical profession remained skeptical, even when they acknowledged that Voronov had built a large and persuasive catalogue of case histories to support his claims. For those without the finances or social capital to aspire to a personal treatment by Steiner or Voronov, a huge range of other rejuvenating options were rapidly becoming available. New diets, exercise regimes and cosmetic products were developed, reflecting cultural anxieties about aging and a desire for rejuvenation. Many of these were advertised as essential parts of a healthy lifestyle, as well as promoters of longevity and a youthful appearance. In his 1923 book, Rejuvenation, for example, the self-styled anti-aging specialist Jean Frumyusan identified a series of domestic habits designed for attaining old age. These included instructions to drink a large glass of water on waking and jump out of bed immediately, to eat slowly and moderately, and, quote, be carnivorous at one meal and vegetarian at the next. Frumyusan also advised periodic fasting for 24 or 48 hours to restore the vitality of the body. By the late 1930s, almost all mainstream medical and scientific professionals decried the pseudoscience of rejuvenation. And on this basis, it's very easy to dismiss the methods of rejuvenation popular in the early 20th century as mere quackery. The ultimate failure of rejuvenation methods based on hormone treatments might tempt us to view the effects of this sensational and controversial episode in the history of medicine as a short-lived fad. However, considering these developments as part of wider trends in anti-aging culture enables us to see that the brief period for which hormones appeared to offer salvation from aging provided a transformative platform in the search for rejuvenation. Its brief moment in the sun positioned rejuvenation front and center in everyday life and reaffirmed the search for extended youthfulness and healthiness as a central goal of modern medical science. Both Steiner and Voronov sat at the intersection between dubious fringe rejuvenating procedures and pioneering experimental biology. Steiner was a key figure in the development of endocrinology as a biomedical specialty, and his research was entirely in keeping with prevailing medical science of the day. This might, at least in part, explain the popularity of Steiner and Voronov's work. However, the social and cultural context of the interwar period, a time of heightened fascination with anti-aging, was equally crucial in shaping public perceptions of and attitudes towards rejuvenation. The aftermath of World War I was characterized by a profound social anxiety for the fate of many young widows whose husbands and partners had lost their lives during the conflict. While there was therefore significant interest in attempts to prolong the productive period of male lives, cosmetics giants such as Du Barry, Elizabeth Arden, and Helena Rubinstein also capitalized on a huge explosion in the international skincare and makeup markets to help women remain attractive. Du Barry launched their new Glandin hormone-containing cream in the 1930s. Elizabeth Arden's Vienna Youth Mask was the must-have beauty treatment of the decade, having been launched in 1927. And Helena Rubinstein nearly single-handedly introduced the idea of beauty science with her hormone twin creams. As well as revealing an innate desire for rejuvenation in large sections of earlier 20th century society, the response to the work of Carroll, Steiner, and Voronov also tells us a little about how science and society viewed the human body. Their work underpinned a powerful sense that there were key differences between male and female bodies, and at the same time, the aging process itself was framed as a natural decline, regulated by changing landscapes of the hormones in the body, and against which medical science had the power to intervene successfully. I want to finish with one final example of how significant rejuvenation was as a topic of public fascination in the 1920s and 30s. In 1937, the famous Blackpool Illuminations chose as its centerpiece the Rejuvenator. In this display, the elderly and infirm at one end proceeded to be transformed back to their childhood, emerging from the fictional rejuvenating machine with vitality and vigor restored. Given the present-day challenges around public health, age-related neurological conditions, and even the climate crisis, it makes me wonder, what are the consequences of the current social and cultural environment? And how is present-day medical science also shaping public perceptions of aging and their expectations of medicine? Thank you.
Thank you, James. We do have 5 minutes for questions. Is there any questions from the audience to James? No? You have questions there? No? Yeah? Where? Ah, okay. Is there any microphone? Yes? There is a microphone.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Well, that was fascinating, especially because we really don't get to hear talks like this usually certainly not the biomedical conferences that we attend, so thank you for that really refreshing historical perspective. So I'm intrigued by the Helena Rubinstein because I grew up with a mother who had such a business, not making the same kinds of creams, but a beauty business. So I'm curious what's happening today. I mean, there's a huge beauty business, right? And there's all these creams, and they're all saying they're anti-aging and they're going to make us younger. So what's the modern perspective of those? Is that something you can comment on?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you look historically at the 20s and 30s, this is the period when there is a massive expansion in the global cosmetics and makeup industry, and lots of the kind of fundamentals of what we see in the present day around claims for these products as being anti-aging, or as having particular kinds of physiological effects on the body, are actually pioneered in this very early period. And what's especially fascinating, I think, is that in just the same way that there are particular kinds of chemicals or types of products or procedures which come into and in some cases very rapidly go out of fashion, you see exactly the same thing reflected in the early 20th century. So vitamins, for example, during the interwar period are kind of widely attributed with this almost mythical power to intervene in the human body. Certain vitamins acquire sort of mythological characteristics as being able to smooth out the skin and avoid the onset of wrinkles. So I think that although the kind of the nature of the medium in some ways with television and mass audiovisual marketing might have changed in the second half of the 20th century into the 21st, I think the fundamental principles about the ways that companies and advertisers have tried to appeal to people's desire for this has remained actually remarkably stable. It's really fascinating to see the strong parallels between what's going on in the early 20th century and the present day.
Okay. We don't have enough time to more questions, so again, thank you, James. It was fascinating.